Hey there. Whoops. Hey there. Welcome to Android application development. I'm playing around with my fonts here to make this readable for you guys. Text font. Let's see. Well, this is ugly, so it's going to go back to small there. Nope. That's ugly too. It's not actually making the code font bigger for me, which I find pretty funny. It's probably under editor. Font. There we go. Okay. Try 15. Alright, let me take a poll. See if 16's... I think 16 is too small. I'm going to go with 18 as a starting point. It's 18. Big enough. Talking about this font back here, the font of the actual development environment over there. I also noticed that the default skin has really bad contrast with comments that come up practically gray, it looks like. I'm going to see if I can change the font for comments until they look a little better. Note that you can change all your default styling guidelines and everything here. Android Studio is super configurable. You gotta give it that. Alright, bigger, so I'm going with 20. Color scheme font. Console colors. Java colors. Kotlin colors. Despite the fact that it tells me that the Kotlin colors are going to be in green, they actually aren't. Green. Yes, they're green. Let's make them limier. Shiny. Okay. Looks like everybody's happy with 20 point. I encourage you to go through and do the same stuff there. I guess KDoc is JavaDoc. And I like my JavaDocs to be blue, because that's what they are in Eclipse. Boom, blue. Alright. Or cyan, I guess. KDoc tag. I can live with that being green. Okay, I don't want line comments to be... I want it to be that same neon green I picked for blocks. Great. Okay. That'll do it for me. If you have any other trouble differentiating text from the background or anything like that, let me know. I can always change the text colors some more. I find Android Studio pretty tough to read most of the time, but the layout's not that bad. It's definitely easy on the eyes, if nothing else. Okay, so I'm going to start a new project here, obviously, so hopefully you've got your Android Studio open. I'll give everybody a couple more minutes while it boots up for those of you with slower computers. That's only half joking, because boy is it slow. And then we're going to make a new Android project and get right into it. Hopefully you've connected your phones. If not, I have my phone display going, so I'm going to show you guys how to go through. This is my brand new OnePlus Nord that I set up this morning. Very nice phone for $150 indeed. It's least last generation flagship quality. The iPhone took a very long time to get a high refresh rate screen, and this has 90 hertz. It's not OLED, but still quite good. All right, so in order to get into developer mode, what you're going to need to do first, you're going to go to something like About Phone, About Device. It's going to be near the bottom usually. So something like About Your Device. It'll probably have your device's name in it. And then it's going to be either build number or Android number, status number, something like that you're going to tap repeatedly. If you accidentally do it to Android version, it'll pop up other stuff here. And then you'll have to find the one. So it's none of these. It's not that one. It's not that one. It's not that. So nothing's happening, so I'm going back. And then other stuff happened because I tapped repeatedly, and that's not good. All right, so it's actually build number on this particular device, so I'm going to tap it repeatedly. Oh, you know what? I'm going to turn on my touches so you guys can see them. Hold on, disregard all of what I'm doing right now. You should actually, once you have your developer options, you can do this as well. It's show taps. Show taps allows you to see the tap location. Obviously very useful for you guys seeing what I'm doing, but also useful for yourself when you're debugging. Okay, so anyway, to get into developer mode, I'm in About Phone. I'm going to tap one of these repeatedly. It happens to be build number on this device. It's usually either build number, kernel version, something of that nature under About Phone. Once you tap it 10 times, it'll say you are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever steps away from being a developer. After you've done it the right number of times, it'll ask you to re-enter your PIN or sign back in again. You're going to do that, and then developer options will be unlocked somewhere in the settings here. On this particular device, they fall under System. On some devices, they are their own thing in that main menu. On this particular device, they fall under System. So you can see I've got developer options there above RAM boost. So that's what you've unlocked there. If you click it, the one thing that you have to enable is the USB debugging option. Without that, you won't be able to connect to Android Studio. So enable the USB debugging option on your device. And then if you want to see those touches as well, you can enable those under I don't do this very often. Is it under drawing? Nope, under input. All right, there it is, under input. And you can also just search for these things, by the way, using that search option. So that'll pop up all of them. But that searches all of the settings, not just the developer ones. And this, again, $150 phone, so it's not like lightning fast or anything. But I've got different USB options there that I'm not interested in. So that's why I don't tend to use the search. I tend to just look through the developer modes. Okay, so I'm going to do a poll and see if everybody's up to that point. Somebody asked Kotlin or Java. You will know soon. All right, looks like everybody's got developer mode set up. If you don't, come talk to me after class. All right, so new. We're going to start a new project. That button there. It's going to offer you some different activities to start with. The first of many fun times in Android. What is the blankest kind of activity? Is it the empty activity or the basic activity? Or should we go with no activity at all? Let's say we want to start with the most bare minimum. We want to make hello world. What is the blankest kind of activity? As it turns out, the blankest kind of activity is the empty one. Blank has some extra stuff on top of empty. There's also other options we'll see later. Just to point out, by the way, for your interest, you can actually write Android code. You can write Android applications in C++. What we do is kind of the, I don't want to call it the beginner mode, but it's the easier version of it, where we use the system calls that the cleverer people over at Google made for us. They made this whole API for us to talk to the Android system in Java and Kotlin. The really hardcore apps are written straight in native C++, but those are a huge endeavor, so we're definitely not going to get into that. I would not in any way recommend it. So we're going to start with an empty activity. I am going to call this intro app. Sure, call it intro app. I have a directory directly in my C drive for these. I find it easier to deal with them organizationally, so I put them right into like an Android directory here. Android projects. Where did I put this thing? It's under Android. No, probably under projects. Maybe new folder. Starter app. I think I called it. Nope, I called it intro app. So we're going to change that to starter app. Okay, I recommend targeting, because in this class I required you to have 7.0 or newer, so I recommend targeting 7.0 and newer. If you hit Help Me Choose, you get this helpful dialog box that tells you when different features were added or removed from the Android ecosystem, and what percentage of devices on the market you cover. And it's been Google or Android's advice for a long time to target at least 5.0 or lower, because 5.0 captures most of the devices on the market, as you can see, like 94% for just 5.0 and up. But most of the devices that are still in circulation today that are running 6.0 or older are quite old indeed, or they're very low cost. So not a huge audience for those kinds of devices in America, at least. You're not going to lose a lot of people by going 7.0 and higher. In my opinion, it is going to make your life a little bit easier, because the system calls changed pretty drastically between 5 and 6. And it's kind of, it's not a huge hurdle, but it's a bigger hurdle to maintain version 5 as well as 6 and up. So if you want to be a little more inclusive, 6 is also a decent starting point. But 7 is my preference. 7 is when they added support for some things like DOS. It was the start of gesture navigation, which got added, I think, fully in 8. So you don't have to deal as much with the navigation bar. Unfortunately, this very complicated decision of which version to target is not something you can really back out of later. So we're going to go 7.0 and higher, because that's what I required for this class. If you want to go lower, you can. We can use these legacy Android support libraries. If we click the very helpful doodad there, it'll tell us nothing, because it's broken, and it's been for a bit. We're going to pick Kotlin as our programming language to start with. You indicated in the preferences survey that you wanted to see Java as well as Kotlin, so I'm going to start with Kotlin, and then if there's still interest, I'll do Java. If there's still time, I'll do Java. But I just went and learned Kotlin for this class, so yeah, I got to show it off. Kotlin, as far as languages go, really only useful for this ecosystem for the moment, but it is picking up steam, and it is a cool language, so that's not necessarily a bad thing to learn. So I'm going to leave that box unchecked for the support libraries. We don't need it because we are using only relatively new devices. You can omit the need for it entirely by only targeting, I think, 9 and up or 10 and up. But that excludes too many devices. Most people today are running 8 or higher, but there's still a few people on 7 and a few hangouts on 6 too. I guess let me do a poll real quick, and among the Android users, see what version of Android are you running. So if this is your primary device, then you can let me know. Otherwise, if it's one of those devices you bought just for this class, you can also let me know. What version of Android are you running? Minor version updates don't matter. Let's see what the OnePlus Nord that I have here is running. Like I said, I just set this up yesterday, so it should be fresh from the factory. It's running. If you go to About Phone, you can see it under Android version there. So I'm running 10, and it's just a $150 phone. So you would go again to About Phone, find your Android version there. I've got 10. Okay, so Kotlin, I did 7.0 and higher. I named it Starter App, made it a folder. Click Finish. It's going to open, if you already have a project open, it's going to open a new window for you, which is kind of weird. It's unusual. Complete with all of the bloat that comes with a new window. I might have to reference my notes there, so I'm going to leave that window open down here in secret in case I have to reference it. Hopefully I won't need them, but we'll see. Okay, going to take a bit of time for everything to finish loading in. You'll see it just started popping in there for me. Needs to do a lot of initial setup, a lot of building and whatnot. Okay, looks like everything's all done. You can tell if everything's done in the background by checking out the Gradle task manager thingamabob that comes up at the bottom. It'll be like a little loading bar for you. So let's take a little tour of what we have at the beginning here, just with a default application. So first we've got this Androidmanifest.xml file. This is going to be important for us down the road. This is where you add all of the different activities, which are basically like the different screens we're going to learn about today of your Android program. This is also where you add different permissions. So if you need to access the memory, the network, anything that's not just basically putting some buttons on the screen requires a special permission, and you're going to request it here. And if you request a permission in the manifest when the user launches the app, it used to ask them if you accept all the permissions, and then it just listed all the permissions that you could offer. But as those of you using newer Android will know, it now asks you for whether or not you want to approve those permissions when you first launch that feature. So if your app has a camera feature, it won't ask you if you give it permission to use the camera until you try to launch the camera. Then it'll ask you. So this obviously requires us developers to do a lot more work. Used to be real straightforward. You just list them in the manifest. You had to approve or disapprove the app wholesale. Now, again, they're a la carte, and as developers, we have to come up with all these fancy dialog boxes and other nuisances in order to ask for them a la carte. So it got a lot more complicated in recent Android versions. I think that business started around 8. We've got a collection of different folders for our source. Probably not used to this coming from Eclipse. We've got our main, kind of just the app's name, and then we've got an Android test and a unit test as well. We're not going to use the Android test or the unit test at all in this semester. They're probably useful for larger projects, but I don't think we'll get to the size or the sort of level of professional enterprise expertise-ness that one needs to get to before unit testing and whatnot becomes important. So you're free, obviously, to write tests if you wish, but we're just going to stick in our regular old Kotlin and or Java programming. It made a activity for you. Remember, we specified we wanted to start with a empty one, so it made one called main activity for you. If you specified that you didn't want one, then the way to make a new activity is to go right-click on that top Java folder, go to New, go to Activity, and here you see the list of things that you can have. Again, bring you to the question of which one is the simplest. We've got basic, blank, and empty. Empty is the simplest of those, and that is the one you'll usually be starting with. There are some other options that we might use later, particularly the full screen one can be useful at times. So an activity, again, basically a display screen. We're going to look at those in a bit. All right, that brings us to the res folder, where we've got a lot more subfolders and a lot more junk. First, we've got Drawable. This is where your icons and different backgrounds you might want to have for your buttons, custom colors, all that kind of cool stuff. It's going to end up in Drawable, probably, and you can see the background and foreground here. You get some pre-mades. You get the Android icon and the little color thing that comes with it. So I'm not going to use those too much. Layout is where you're going to specify programmatically the graphical user interface for all your different activities. So activity mains is already there, and it's already loaded at the start. You're going to get into this in a minute, but let's table that for now. Mipmap is where all the resources end up. So I said things like icons are going to end up here. You see icons. You'll notice that there's a bunch of different versions of the launcher, and then next to it stuff in parentheses. So Android typically requires you to upload multiple versions of all of your art assets. Depending on the resolution and the size of the user's screen, it'll load a different one. So they've got their high DPI, medium DPI, extra high DPI, extra high DPI, and extra high DPI options. This obviously being the most beautiful, and of course you can tell the difference between the two of them. Grainy, beautiful. Grainy, beautiful. Grainy, beautiful. So extra high DPI is the highest. Anytime you build a resource, an art asset, an icon, whatever, you're probably going to want to build multiple versions like this. So the easiest way to do that, well, I guess I'll show you later. That's probably not important for today. Then for some devices, for icons and stuff, they prefer round versions. So let's look at Oxygen OS on the OnePlus, for example. Oxygen OS prefers... How do I get back to home? Wow, what am I doing? I'm not good at phone. OnePlus prefers round icons for all of their stuff. So if you look at the different things in the app drawer, you'll see that they all have round icons. Okay, so some layouts prefer the square ones instead. You got your different options there. Not only icons go here too, you got other assets there too. Values is going to be important for us today too. In values we can specify different colors so that we can use them by name instead of having to type their hexadecimal value every time. So if you want to have a theme, like a colored theme, you want to create a template of different colors, you would probably create it here and then reference them by name. These are kind of the defaults that appear. I got my purples, my teals, my blacks. It's the default color scheme there. Strings is where you are going to put different references. You're going to put different references in the strings. These are going to be things like, obviously, the application's name here, but also stuff like string constants that you want to use. If you create something like a spinner or a drop-down menu and you want to add different options for it, you'll probably put it there. And as we're going to see soon, you're also going to put like the names of your buttons, the text that they have, I should say, the text that your buttons have, that kind of stuff. That's also going to go here. I'll explain why that's important later. Themes, we might also edit today. Themes allows you to change the default appearance of your activities. And then generally, your app comes with two themes depending on whether or not the user has their night mode enabled. It can make everything darker, and you can see there's a slight difference in the colors used between the regular theme and the night mode or dark mode or what have you. Android allows you to enable that night mode option in the settings, and then if your app sees that it's night mode on the system, it's supposed to switch to it automatically. So you might have multiple themes there. Then you got your Gradle folder, which we're not going to touch, and God help you if you have to. Gradle is its own programming language. It has hilarious little notes like this. Do not place your implication dependencies here. They belong in the individual model Gradle. Okay, fine, then I'll go to model. It looks similar. Lovely. And then you've got your Java version, the JVM target. It picked 1.8 for me. I have 11 installed on this machine, so it's unclear why it picked 1.8. Most likely Android Studio is still shipping with 1.8 at the time I downloaded this. You'll notice that your Android probably shipped with 1.8 as well if you get into this build Gradle too. Let me know in either chat if you don't have 1.8 as your JVM version, by the way. It'll be interesting. You'll notice that there's already a few dependencies imported, and you haven't even done anything yet. There's Android X and App Compat. Android X and Android X App Compat. Remember I mentioned these last time, the big split in the Android file hierarchy in different versions. We're not going to get into that now. We'll get into that later. Okay, without further ado, let's get started on development. That was a long intro. I apologize. Let's do some development now. We're going to go to activity main.xml, and we're going to start editing the layout of our main activity. So, the first thing you'll notice is that you've got this graphical user interface for developing. This I refer to as baby mode. So this is the little kids version of editing, Android layouts. You get to just play with blocks. Look, a button. Look, another button. Just make it with blocks like that. You can get it to work eventually. This is how non-developers lay out their Android applications. Developers obviously go to the code. So in the top right there, when you're in the XML view, you can go to design, or you can go to code, or you can actually view both and split, but you have to have a pretty big screen to pull this off for obvious reasons. So let's check out the split for now. You'll notice that all the different things to add buttons and stuff are gone. You have to access them specially somewhere. I don't remember. Another thing I want to point out about design now at the top there is you'll see what device you're previewing it on. It comes with a few different devices that you can look at. You would have to look up the size of your screen and the resolution and everything to match the device that you are thinking of. So this is what it would look like on a Pixel. This is what it would look like on a Pixel 2. This is what it would look like on an Nexus 6. Not important for this particular app since they all look the same at this point. I'm going to roll with the Pixel for now as my preview device. And you can also change to landscape mode and see what it would look like when it gets rotated into landscape mode. And then you can also switch into night mode and see what it would look like in night mode. So you have lots of different options there for previewing what it's going to end up looking like. Okay, the first thing if you are developing in non-baby mode is to take the constraint layout that they start you out with as the root layout and change it to a better layout. And I'm going to right-click on it and go to Convert View and change it to a linear layout instead. So I found the constraint layout in my component tree, I right-clicked on it, and I changed it to a linear layout. You could also just go to your code and make sure that instead of constraint layout, it says linear layout. So you would have just had to change it there. All the other stuff stays the same for this. We're going to actually go over constraint layout after this, but I'm going to go over linear layout first because historically, linear layout was the way that you did it. It was the way that Android recommended you to do it, and so I'm going to do it that way to show you what it once was like and what it still is like for many developers. Linear layout I find really straightforward to understand. Basically, linear layout splits your content into either horizontal columns or vertical rows, and then you get to decide how large all of the components are inside of those columns or rows by specifying their weights. So you started with a horizontal layout here by default. We are actually going to change that to a vertical layout by right-clicking on it and going to linear layout and converting it to vertical. So we want a vertical layout here. And then I'm going to add some components here. I'm going to add a button. I'm going to add an image view. I'm going to use this guy, I guess. Go with that guy. Foreground icon. Add another image view. Go with that guy again. Okay, in order to make these two different, I'm going to change their backgrounds. So I go to the image view, and then I'm going to find background, and I'm going to change this guy's to red. I'm going to go to that guy, and I'm going to change his background to something that's not red, blue. Great, red and blue. All right, so I have a bunch of components now. How do I spread them out correctly across this layout? So you'll notice that they've all become children of the layout. They all get stupid default names like button 2 and image view. We're going to change those later. And they've all just sort of stacked on top of each other here vertically because I changed it to stack into vertical bars. Before I move forward, let me take a poll and make sure everybody's following me. Got to where I am so far. All right, everyone's following along. Good. All right, so the way that I said again to make things spread out properly in your linear layout is to give them weights. And it's one of the options that it gives you at the top there, a layout weight. So let's say that I want this text to take up the first 10% of the top, then I want the button to take up the next 10%, and then I want these two spaced out over my remaining screen real estate. So I like to do it out of 1, but you can actually do your weight out of an arbitrary amount. So my button's going to be 0.1 weight, my text is a 0.1 weight, and that leaves me with 0.8 left to work with. So that means both of these guys are going to be 0.4. All right, so now these guys have filled up 10% of their respective space, and then these guys took up the remaining 80% together. You can also nest linear layouts to achieve the same effect, although we'll see why you shouldn't do that because it doesn't recommend it. All right, and I accomplished all of this in idiot mode, which is fine, or baby mode, or whatever you want to call it. I could have done the same thing in code. Let's go back to the code and take a look at some of the stuff that it's made for us in the XML here. So we got this Android layout.weight thing. I find it much easier to edit the weights in here after I've specified a couple, because you can just kind of paste them in there and then just change them. So that's nice. So I've got my weights. We already did that. Then I've got the width and the height. You'll notice that the text box is small. It doesn't have all the horizontal space that it could have. In fact, let me change the words on it to some more words. More words, words. Okay, it just made itself bigger in order to accommodate the extra words that it has. Let's keep going. Let's see what happens when you go over the end of the line. Well, look at that, it wrapped around. Okay. But let's say that I want it to take up all of the available space that it has, even when it doesn't have quite that much stuff in it. And the problem right now, the reason why it's not doing that, is because its width is designated as wrapped content. Wrapped content means attempt to fit the content that's inside of this thing as well as you can, and then adjust your width in order to fit the content inside of it. But what we want is for it to use all of the horizontal space available to it and spread across that entire row. And for that, we're going to set it to match parent. And its linear layout is the parent. The parent spans the entire screen. The linear layout is the root layout here, so it spans the whole screen. And so that allows this guy to spread out all the way across the screen there. The button and the two image views already have that. Let's look at what happens if I change the button to wrap context. We see it becomes just big enough to accommodate the space inside of it. Change it to match parent. It fills the whole row that's available to it. What if I changed its height to match parent? Well, it would fill the entire linear layout and leave no room for anybody else. So we never want to do that on the height. What if I wanted to make it a specific height? What if I want my button to be exactly 40 pixels tall? The answer is don't, because phones are different. You never ever want to specify components in standard units like that. But let's say you did for some dumb reason. There are many different options available to you for your length measurements. There's DP, which is like a measure of pixel precision basically, inches, freedom units, millimeters, point, which is also pixely. There's pixels directly, pixels. SP, which I don't even know what that is. Let's go with DP. Let's see how big 40 DP is. That's going to be... It's not changing. Let's make it bigger. Let's go with 400 DP. There we go. So Android plays this weird game where it tries to accommodate the height along with the layout weights that you specified as well. Only when you make it really absurd will that come into play. Lots of funky things happen when you try to specify heights manually. So broadly speaking, never do it. It's a terrible idea. Just use wrap content or match parent for your height and width of your components. All right, let's say that I want it to be a little bit smaller. I'm going to make it 0.05. Does that work with the weights? Sure it does, except everything doesn't add up to 1 now, so that makes it kind of uneven for me. My OCD means that I always try to make sure that my components add up to 1. All their weights add up to 1. So if I take a 0.5 away from somewhere, I'm going to add it to a different component to make sure that the weights across the linear layout all add up to 1. All right, is everybody following the weights discussion? I'm going to take a poll here, ask you a little quiz-like question about weights. Let's say if I want components to take up even thirds of the screen, what should the weight of each of them be? 3, 4, 5.3, 0.25, 0.5. If I want my components to take up even thirds of the screen, what should there be? Obviously, I rounded too. So. That's the right answer. Somebody caught the trick question. The answer is all of the above. Remember, the weights don't have to be out of 1. So if I want them all to take up even thirds, I just have to make sure they all have the same weight, and then they'll take up even thirds. But I got this other guy here with a 0.4. I got to give him a weight of 0 or something. But even if he has a weight of 0, right, he's still going to try to match his parent content, that icon inside. So he's going to try to fit his icon while staying within his weight. And so basically there's going to be some guesswork involved. So these guys take up even thirds of the space that's available to them because they all have the same weight, while accommodating the fact that this guy with a weight of 0 still has to fit his content. So if the device that you're coding on doesn't have enough room to fit the content that you're trying to display, you can still get funky rendering using these kinds of linear layouts. I'm going to go back to what I had before. Somebody asked about scale. So let's take a look at scale. You can always search for attributes using the bar there. You've got your scale X and your scale Y. You can use these. I generally don't for my layouts. As you can see, what happens is the content gets stretched, which is usually not what you want to do, right? So scale 1, I believe, is the default, and that's no stretching. But if you wanted, for some reason, the content to get stretched, let me try it on one of these icons where it should be more obvious. And you see the icon got stretched. So normally you don't want to stretch things. Normally you want everything to be the way that the artist designed it. So whatever icon you have, whatever text you have, you don't want to scale it. Alright, so we've got weights down. Now let's try to make things on the same row. We're going to add a bunch of components to the same row. So let's say I want the button to actually be on the same row with this text here, rather than being on its own row. So I want to have the text and a button, and then my image view is below here. So in this case, I'm going to make a nested layout. And after I make this, we're going to see that Android doesn't like it. So I'm going to go to my layouts in my baby mode picker here, and I'm going to add a horizontal layout to my hierarchy here, and I'm going to drop it under the linear layout there. Okay, so this linear layout that just got added there has a height of match parent. We don't want that. We want it to be a height of wrap content, and I'm going to distribute its weight as 0.2. These two components, the text view and the button, I'm going to make them children of that linear layout instead of being children of the larger one. I'm going to move the text view up so it appears to the left of the button. I'm going to change the weights of them so that they are appropriately sized. So the width is no longer match parent. The width is now going to be wrap content on both of them because we don't want them to be as wide as that entire horizontal linear layout that they share. I'm going to have the text take up, let's say 0.7 of that space, and the button take up 0.3 of it. This doesn't give the button enough room to live, but we'll see how that works later. The height, I want to match the parent's height because I want to take up the entire linear layout that I have available to me. I can do likewise for the button. So obviously I've made this pretty ugly so far. So how can I improve it some more? Well, it's probably too big. 0.2 is too tall, so I could do like 0.05 maybe and scale it back. Give the image views a little bit more play, so I could make them, let's say, both 0.45. Make the linear layout that contains my buttons and stuff. If those two are 0.45, then I have 0.1 left over to play with to make an even one. Am I doing the right thing in terms of wrapping content and matching parents here? Let's see, I've inverted what I did for vertical, so yeah, that makes sense. So how come my button is so tiny? Well, I guess I just need to give it more weight. What if I give it 5? Oh no, it's getting smaller and smaller. What's happening to my button? Give this away to 0.5. What's going on with my button? What if I make this both match parent? Then what's going on with my button? What do I do? How do I get these to not look awful? Any ideas? Any ideas on how I get them to not look awful? Well, let's try looking at the code and see what's wrong. All right, so we see that it has created a new linear layout that's nested inside of the other one. All right, so it's been nested inside of the other one here. Its width matches the parent one, so it takes up the entire row. And its height matches the parent one, so its height wraps its content, so it fits the contents that are inside of it, and then it has its own weight, and its orientation is horizontal. Then the text view that we've made, it has a match parent and match parent on both definitions. Change that back to what we had before. We had it at wrap content match parent. There we go. So that's closer to what we were looking for. And it's a ton of words, obviously. And then we have the weights for it, which I said were 0.5 and 0.1. What if I try to make those more even? What if I go 0.7 and 0.3 like I had before? Still kind of ugly, right? So what can I do to make that text area smaller? Here's a hint. What if it was just less words? Would it look right at that point? Yeah, that looks better. Still not great, right? But better. Okay. What else can I do? What can I do? And have the button take up more or less space. I mean, these are basically all the tools that you have to play with, which is what I'm trying to demonstrate to you at this point. You have some pretty limited tools, and a lot of the time it's trying to goad things into the right positions by reducing the size of different elements and things like that. So be careful, I guess, would be my warning to you about dealing with large text boxes and stuff. You can see that they can just resize themselves accordingly, especially if you use wrap content, because they're just going to take up as much space as they need in order to display themselves, which can mess with the weights of your other stuff. So I guess we'll look at some tricks later for how you can kind of goad text boxes into being smaller in general, but you can always do the baby mode thing and shrink it manually as needed. And what that's going to do is affect the width and set it to a specific DP, which is something that you never want to do again. So actually, I'm going to run this, and we'll see how close it looks on the OnePlus to how it looks on the display model pixel here. So let's see what the reality on the phone looks like compared to what we got. Now you'll notice that it's still building. The first time you build and run your app will take forever. The next time will take a fairly long time too, but the first time takes forever. All right, let's see what it looks like compared to reality. We'll see that the pixel has less horizontal or more horizontal space to work with. So it has a little bit extra padding after that exclamation mark that I don't have on my device. The OnePlus has an extra navigation bar, which doesn't show up here because this is a bar that's unique to the OnePlus operating system, the Oxygen OS. And then the OnePlus also has this bar up there, the starter app bar, which we don't see. That's part of the navigation bar that's hidden. You can disable that too with a template, and we'll look at how you can do that later. So a little bit different than what we were expecting. We'll see that your expectations can get defeated pretty heavily. All right, I'm going to go ahead and stop it. And my phone just restarted. That's not great. Okay, well, we won't test again for a while. All right, so that's the way to do it with nested linear layouts, sort of make them as a table form. I'll show you a couple better looking layouts that I have. Let me address some of the concerns that Android Studio has here with different resource error messages and stuff that it's popping up here. So first, we're seeing the message hard-coded string button should use @string resource instead. So Android's going to insist that for all the text of your buttons and dialog boxes and stuff like that, you add all of that stuff here in your strings resources. So you can make a little area for your buttons, you can leave a comment or whatever. So let's say that this is click me. That text is going to be click me, and that's going to be a string. So we're going to go back to our activities page and set the buttons text to be that click me instead. If you look at the options in text, it'll take you to all the different strings and whatnot that you have available, and you can pick it there, and that's a whole ordeal. Or you can just go to your code and change what it said in text to, once you start typing the @, it'll show you all the different resources available in that strings.xml file. So I changed that to @string click me. And going back to the design, you'll see the button now says click me. All right, so let me add the text for my dialog box. String name equals click me text helper, something like that. Go ahead and click that button over there. You notice the string literal doesn't end up in parentheses, which is kind of weird. And then again, I can either pick it from the text dropdown in baby mode, or I can go into code mode, delete what's there now, and just start typing @ and find the click me text helper there in my string resources. Okay, so that got rid of that error. Now I can see the two strings that I imported there. Lovely. And my buttons are the right size and everything. Now I've got something else as soon as it's done refreshing. Go on then. It'll get around to it. Okay. It's popping up that there's a problem with nested layout weights, and it says that that's bad for performance. So whenever you nest a linear layout inside of another linear layout, as we did here, Android's going to complain that that is bad for performance. It's actually a really, really, really negligible kick until you get to like 6 layers deep of linear layouts. So just disregard that and don't worry about it. It's perfectly fine unless you're putting like tables inside tables inside tables. It's also going to say image without content description. So if you have any kind of image on the screen, in order to be compatible with screen readers and tools for the blind and such, you need some kind of description of the image. So if you apply the suggested fix and then go to the code, you'll see that it's added this content description there, and it doesn't have anything. It just says to do right now. So we're going to add another string here for the content description. We'll call that Android icon name red. And we'll just say that's a red Android icon. And then I'll do the same thing for the blue guy. Blue Android icon. Okay, and now I can set those content descriptions up. And these don't come into play, obviously, for the vast majority of your users, but of course, if you were blind, they'd probably be quite helpful. So we're going to include those. The blue one is the one on the top. Blue. Okay, now if a blind person was to try to use a screen reader on this application, it would read out Android icon blue or Android icon red, respectively. So that's helpful. If you want to earn the accessibility bonus on your app, go ahead and make sure that all of your different things have that kind of support for sight-limited people. Okay, so we've nested a horizontal layout into a linear layout and made it look relatively decent. Let me just apply some quick polish to make it look good. Let's see. All right, that looks good to me. Doesn't add up to 1, but we'll skip over it for now. So that looks pretty decent to me. All right, so I said that we would do the constraints mode next. So we're going to create a new activity. I'm going to create a new activity here. Remember not to create class files. That's an extra headache. When you want to create a new actual screen where stuff happens, you're going to create an activity every time. So I'm going to create a new empty activity. I'm going to call this one Constraints Playground. Constraints Playground. It's going to make the Kotlin file that we will look at later for it, and then it also made that XML file. And if you go into the manifest, you'll see that it also got added as an activity in the manifest. So it does all of that for you automatically when you make an activity. You can also do that stuff manually by making the class files and stuff, but it's much easier to let Android Studio handle all of that for you. Okay, so constraints are relatively new to Android. They are more, I guess, artistic and kind of, I don't know, more intuitive way to design your UI. I'm usually quite a fan. If you wanted to make something like this, let's say you wanted to make this, okay, for whatever reason you want to make this kind of UI. This is tough to do with linear layouts, right? You can try to conceive of a way how you might do this. So there's a blank kind of placeholder image here, a blank one there. You've adjusted the weights accordingly. Each of these is a row, and then these are split into horizontals. This one is just centered on its own, and it wraps its content. This one has like a placeholder empty in between. It would be pretty complicated to do this with linear layouts. But with constraint layouts, it's actually not that hard. So constraint layout works by treating all of your components as if they are attached to one another via imaginary springs. Okay, so imagine that there is a spring that goes to the top here. Okay, and this is now anchored to the top by a spring. You can also add a spring by clicking this little doodad here. And then you can make the amount of, let's call it springiness, or the strength of that spring, higher or lower accordingly. So this spring becomes stronger. It has no other springs attached to it, so right now it's just sort of poked out 32 degrees. Let's see what happens when we attach our left and right springs here first. So first I attach a left spring, then I attach a right spring. What happens when you have two evenly powered springs? The thing ends up directly between them. So it's now connected by two evenly powered springs that anchor it to the left and the right, and then a relatively a 32 strong spring that anchors it to the top. So if I added another spring connecting to the bottom, right now, let's say I strengthen the top spring, what it's going to end up doing is pushing it towards the bottom, right? If I add power to the top spring, that pushes it to the bottom. If I add power to the bottom spring, it'll push it towards the top. If I add power to conflicting springs, then that doesn't really make sense. Okay, so I'm going to remove the bottom one here. I forget how to remove them. Whoops, I removed all of them. Okay, that wasn't right. Added them back. And then instead of anchoring this guy's spring to the bottom, I'm going to anchor his spring to these buttons. Alright, so I anchored it to that button, and I'm anchoring this button spring to that guy as well. So now they're both anchored. And then it'll ask you, what do you want to do? Do you want to anchor the top to the top? Do you want to anchor the top to the bottom? It'll pop up a preview of which one you're going to do. I obviously want to anchor to the bottom here. Okay. I could also get rid of this and anchor them both like that so it's more consistent. So both of these guys are now spring anchored to the bottom there. You'll see that this guy has a value of 95 to sit where he is. So let's try that. Let's give this one a value of 95. See the vertical spring pumps him out there. Okay, should we anchor these guys to the sides of the screen? Sure. All right, so this guy has a spring anchored to that side of the screen, but then his right side spring gets anchored to this button's left side spring, and that button spring gets anchored to the side of the screen there. Now, as long as this guy's right spring is as strong as this guy's left spring, they should end up kind of centered, right? So what should I give the value of this guy's right spring in order to get them, how they were in the middle there? What should I give to this guy's right spring? If I can give him like 32. What's happening? It's moving. So just going to click through these again. I got this guy's left spring anchored to the left side of the screen with 0 strength. Right spring anchored to this button with 0 strength. And then this guy is anchored to the right side of the screen, but I want them in the middle there, right? I want them in the middle. So what's the deal? Like, why is this guy stuck against the right-hand side of the screen? What can I do to fix this? Okay, you have an evenly strength string here. I keep saying string. Evenly strength spring here and here. That's going to use up basically all of your springiness if you think about the size of the buttons as well. So if we want them to end up kind of going over there, we're going to have to at least weaken this middle spring relative to the other two. So let me strengthen the right. Set the left to, I don't know, 16. And then I'm going to strengthen that one. What does that end up with? Well, okay, now I've pushed this button a little further this way. I haven't pushed that one away yet. All right, let's say I strengthen this one some more. Whoa, okay, probably not 3,000. So I strengthen this one some more. Okay, now it's, does that look even to you? Maybe. Well, what if I set this to 0? Does that look even to you? Yes, it is. How did I figure that out? Basically magic. Like I said, this one is more intuitive. It favors sort of a more artistic perspective. The actual kind of rhyme and reason behind these things, especially to a programmatically minded person, is hard maybe to understand at times. But if you think about it, all right, I made a 64 strong from the right. I've got a 32 strong on the left, and then a 0 strong that way. It kind of makes sense if you don't think about it too hard. Let's see. Is my device back yet? Yes. My device is back, but my screen share is not. So we'll look at it later. Alright, let's say that I want all of those guys to move when I space this one further from the top. If I add power to the top spring here, all of those buttons that are attached are going to move too because they are secured to that guy's bottom spring as part of their constraints. Okay, so since they're attached to that button by the bottom constraint, they're going to move as well when that guy moves. Okay, so to anchor these two buttons where they are, alright, first they're both going to probably be anchored to the bottom of the screen, and they're going to take their top spring anchors from the bottom, the buttons above them. Let's do a little weird spring button daisy chaining here and just kind of link them all together in different ways. Okay, if I just move them manually a bit, let's see how close I can end up to what I'm looking for. Now, these guys I already designated as evenly spaced. Okay, so if these guys are evenly spaced, if the middle guys are evenly spaced, then I can make these guys evenly spaced by just anchoring relative to them instead of anchoring to the sides of the screen like this layer was. So this can be my layer that's anchored to the left and right hand sides of the screen, and this layer can just be anchored to the top and the bottom and then to one another. So I could actually remove this side constraint completely, just anchor these two guys to one another, and then anchor them to the top as much as I wish. So let's say I didn't even have these constraints here. Then what would happen? You know, this guy's just floating now. Just moving around on his own. Look at him go. How do I get this spaced out setup that I was looking for? Let me delete these and start from the beginning. This is probably how I would do it. I'd line them up as close to where I want them as possible. I'm going to link that guy to the button above him. And link that guy to the button above him. Then I'm going to link them together. I'll link this guy to the side. Link this guy to the side. Oops. Okay, I'm going to make this guy's side stronger like I did for the last one. I'm going to make both their verticals strong but even. And then I just have to adjust the spacing in order to get them to line up with one another. So this is going to be like, try to use even multiples here. So I operated in 32s above. That doesn't mean I have to operate in 32s in this row too. I could operate in hundreds down here, even though I operated in 32s above. Go with 50 there, 100 there. That seems pretty even, but sometimes it can be deceptive. So a little bit more testing would probably be necessary here to make sure that they're completely even. And then I probably want to anchor them to the bottom at some point too, because there's no constraint to the bottom of the screen at the moment. So I want them both constrained to the bottom. And then I'm going to adjust their shared springiness so that the bottom one is much stronger. Or you could not anchor them to the bottom at all, by the way. It's perfectly fine to anchor them only to the top of the screen and then rely on the springiness from the top to propagate all the way down. So, quick poll. Which do you prefer so far? Linear, constraint. Constraint has definitely taken over as most people's choice. It's pretty funky. One of the things that bothers me about constraint is that you can't, like if I wanted to link these two buttons to that one by their bottom, I can't link the bottom to two places. Each bubble can only have one outgoing link, but it can have as many incoming links as you want. So it can be pretty irritating to set it up with that in mind. Sometimes it can be easier to omit one of your side constraints and anchor like only to the left side of the screen. Sometimes if you have a layer that's aligned horizontally the way you want it, like this one is, you could actually anchor not only the top to the bottom, but also the left to that guy's right, and anchor this guy's right to that guy's left, or vice versa, and then give them like, I think you can do negative springiness. No, you can't. Okay, so that one would be like 64 that way, and this one's going to be like 64 that way, and that actually makes them perfect because now they're anchored to these guys, which are already anchored evenly to the left and right hand sides of the screen. So now I don't have to deal with the left and right hand side anchoring here, like I kind of insinuated earlier. So that's pretty neat. Usually if I don't need a bottom anchor, I'll just omit it. I'll just anchor to one, either the top or the bottom. Likewise, if I don't need a right anchor, I might omit it, but I usually like to have at least one row or at least one button that's anchored to everything, and that one becomes like my master, and everything drops down from there as a hierarchy. Yeah, sorry for the explanation, guys. Well, that's about as good as I can make it. So look at what happened when I made that one smaller, right? That one is linked to that one, and that one's linked to the one below by its spring, so they all moved. So if I change this one, likewise, they'll all move. Ta-da! So this is really convenient, right? Because now I can kind of change the whole layout pretty much at will, and that's pretty cool. I can just kind of make things bigger and smaller as I wish, so I'll just bias it up there like 300, 350. The other nice thing is that this tends to translate better to different screen layouts. You tend to have a better, I don't know, you have a better time laying it out on screens of different widths and heights this way than with a linear layout, where sometimes a screen that's taller than you expected, maybe much taller than you expected, ends up looking bad. I find that this also translates better to landscape view. Let's check that out. So landscape view, not my finest example, but let's look at landscape view for the linear layout version. Heck, actually that one looks better, so I just anti-made my point. Sometimes the constraint layout looks better, sometimes I guess it looks worse. So in this case, what's the problem with it? It uses that left and right kind of orientation there for its springiness. Let's get rid of the left spring and the right spring there and make those both floating. This one's even. This one's going to take its left alignment from that one, and this one's going to take its right alignment from that one. That makes them even but silly spaced. If I get rid of their common one, that's not good either, so it's not easy. Get rid of their common one, get rid of that one. Okay, here we go. I'm going to anchor this one to the left of that one, and then I'm going to anchor that one to that one, and then I'm going to give that one 32 springiness, and that one half of its size and springiness. No, I want it on the left instead. There we go. That's kind of what I was looking for, and now let's see if that looks better in portrait mode. All right, this is a little bit more universal. So now I have a landscape and portrait mode. So yeah, play with the constraint layout. Neither of them are good. I prefer linear for anything that's simple, because you see how I struggle to make just a simple pattern in the constraint layout there. It's much better to stick with something that's simple until you need the constraint, the complexity of the constraint layout. So I prefer the linear until you need this for whatever reason you're going to happen to need it for down the road. It can be pretty weird to work with, especially with the weird default dimensions that it gives you. And then I'll probably show you some more tricks for finished constraint layouts as samples at some point down the road. These back to even. There we go. That was a cool one. Okay, so we have about 5 minutes left. Any questions on these two basics of layouts that we learned today, the linear and the constraint? So the nested linear layout and the constraint layout. There's also a now depreciated layout called the it used to be grid layout, now I think they call it the table layout, which lets you have basically the functionality of a linear layout all as one object, and it can be a little easier to code sometimes. If we look at the code for a table layout, it automatically gives you rows, kind of like how those nested horizontal layouts looked, and it automatically gives you a weight. And you can add weights to your different rows and such, so it's basically the same in terms of how it works as the linear layout. It just has that nesting automatically, and they're referred to as table rows instead. I don't usually use it because I find it kind of annoying to like add columns to it. It's harder to edit down the road than the linear one. Okay, what else we got today? Nested weights are inefficient. And let's see, do we have any complaints on the constraint layout? Just the hard-coded string button. So again, I would go back to my code and I would change all of those to click me. One of the reasons I don't like constraint layout versus the linear one is that the code that it generates is long and practically indecipherable. So you can see that it is much longer than the other one, the linear one. Also see that the certain dimensions got added to it in DP, which again is usually a bad move because it's going to end up looking silly on devices where that number of pixels doesn't work. But if you remove it, that's what your layouts are in, so you can't do that. So you have to just treat the DP as basically like an arbitrary unit that you're working with. You're still going to end up probably running into problems like I did in landscape mode there, where as soon as I flipped it, it looked completely different because I hadn't thought about how those springs would work on a differently sized screen there. So that's going to happen kind of regardless, just when you use numbers like this. You have these weird constraint start to end of and top to bottom of, start being the left, end being the right, top and bottom being pretty straightforward. So you've got that added complexity there. Yeah, I just find that the code is quite a bit longer, compared to the linear layout, which is usually a little easier to understand. The constraint is overkill for hierarchical, straightforward ones like we did with the linear layout like this. So like a login page or just like a display with a couple of image views, go with the linear. If you've got something a little fancier, go with the constraint. So what I'd like you guys to try out before we meet again next time, just make the coolest layout that you can come up with constraint mode, and then try to make it actually work in landscape. And after you've done that, upload your XML file to Discord, and somebody else should open it up and give it a shot. So open somebody else's XML, see if it looks good on your phone, see if it looks good on your phone in landscape mode, and I think you'll be surprised. You'll find some pretty funny issues with those things. So I'm going to send you guys this one to try on your phones. Let's go with that one. And that one, play around with your own different ones. Take a look at how they look at on your phones. See if they look like crap. I'm going to see if I can get my OnePlus booted again in the last minute of class here and see if it looks okay on it. Ah, it restarted for a system update. Lovely. Hello, OnePlus. Okay. Let's see what it looks like on the actual device. Does it look all linear and beautiful like it looks in the preview? Ah, shoot. I'm running the wrong page, right? I'm just going to cheat a little and copy all of that code into this one so that I don't have to do anything special in order to get them back. Okay, what does it look like? And we see already there's a mistake, right? Unlike the preview, where these are evenly spaced, or at least it looks like they are, in reality, the spacing is not even. The left side over here much wider than the right side over here. So this constraint layout is a fail overall. I have to rethink how I did the springiness here. Vertically, everything looks good, but in terms of the spacing being even this really simple one is a fail. And actually, now that I look at it, I think this area is also wider than that one. All right, so try to make your own. Put them on canvas. Look at each other's and see if you can make, just using all these different spring tools and nothing else, if you can make a nice looking, complicated constraint layout that works on other people's devices too. And again, easiest way to display it is what I did there. Just paste their code into your activity main and then run it. Then you don't have to worry about making a new activity or anything. So it's just for laughs at this point. All right, that's it for today. Next time, we're going to pick up on a little bit of code, a little bit more formatting. Yeah, all right. Activities, that kind of thing. See you next time.